Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Agwacha Chinedu Collins, and you're welcome to today's edition of Leaders Hangout. Today we're going to be dissecting a very crucial issue in leadership, which is management of conflicting interests in leadership. And I'm going to be doing this today with very important colleagues, very learned colleagues, and co-discussants. And here I have Mr. Okekechukwu Dikene. He is the president of University of Nigeria Students Bar Association. Mr. Kene, you're welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good afternoon, everybody. You're welcome.
And then we also have Mr. Agodane Chinonso. He is the president, the chamber leader of Justice Oputa Chambers, Student Chamber here at University of Nigeria Students Bar Association. Mr. Daniel, you're welcome to the show.
Thank you, Moderator.
So let's jump right into it. So Mr. Agodane, what's your take on management of conflicting interests in leadership?
Okay, thank you for the question. Basically, when we talk about the management of conflicting interests, we are looking at the ways whereby conflicts are being resolved among parties. So the very key and fundamental thing that we must also underline there is that conflicts are bound to happen in the various institutions, homes, among students, anywhere you can think of. As far as you mentioned two or more people, whether in families or anywhere, there could likely and most always be conflicts amongst them, especially when they disagree in opinions or when there is differences in interest.
So, Mr. Okekechukwu Dikene, what's your take on management of conflicting interests in leadership?
All right, thank you so much. First of all, you can't talk about management of conflicting interests without talking about managing people. So, by managing conflicting interests, you talk about how to manage the individual differences or opinions of people. Because people that you are managing or people who are causing the conflict are people from different backgrounds. They have different ideas and opinions. So when you talk about managing those conflicting interests, it's basically talking about how to manage the individual differences and opinions of people and how to reconcile them to make it a very diplomatic event.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Okekechukwu Dikene. So, Mr. Agodane, when you were making your point, you said something about conflicts arising in certain, you made allusion to conflicts, coming up in certain circumstances, even in families and all that. So, how exactly does conflict arise? What are the things that give rise to conflict?
All right. Like I indicated earlier, the very thing I believe that is very key in determining how conflict arises is where people have uncommon interest. And I'll give you a typical example. When you look at the situation in the Middle East right now, in fact, a couple of days ago, the world was set amazed looking at what's happening between Israel and Palestine.
Exactly, yeah.
When you look at the discussion on ground, whether or not the Israelites or the Palestinians actually had, the rights hold, or who has the right or the legal right over the particular land in question. These are issues that arise and give rise to conflict. So, using that as a case study, you get to understand that the United Nations, for instance, over the years have recognized two nation states. They've tried to see how they can wade in and see whether we can recognize both the Palestine and the Israeli nation state. But it hasn't been working because of inability of the parties to come to a common terms, to reach a consensus. So, as far as there is an uncommon interest, exactly, each state, for instance, is looking for how to be, looking forward to have their right declared absolute, more like they want to have dominance over the land. The same thing goes for Israel, the same thing goes for the Palestine. So the interest is not common, in other words. So as far as the interests are not common, then they are bound to be conflicts.
So you're basically saying that these are two persons that none wants to compromise for the other.
Exactly. When there is no compromise, especially how to unify these interests and have a common ground, then there are bound to be conflicts.
Okay. So what? Just like you said, when you're making your point, I think something even occurred to me about emotions, emotional intelligence, so to speak. If you may, emotional intelligence, I think it basically means that the ability of a person to manage their emotions, to understand, use, and manage their emotions in a more useful way, in a positive way. to be able to address, reduce stress, address, overcome challenges, and then probably diffuse conflict. So it speaks to restraint and one's ability to explore some level of alternatives, so to speak, as alternatives. So let's go back to Mr. Okeke-Chukwudikene. So Mr. Okeke-Chukwudikene, we've heard from Mr. Ago Daniel on how conflict arises, and then we've also talked about human emotions. So we want to know when, because there are times where this conflict escalates, goes beyond what was initially expected or even envisaged. So what then should be done? How can it be managed?
Well, basically, there are lots of ways conflicts can be managed. When you talk about managing it now, you talk about how to de-escalate it, because this is something that has escalated. You get? So we're talking about how to de-escalate it now. And part of these ways, of course, we talk about there are other legal. Of course, we are in a society of law and order, and the first and foremost is talk about legal approaches. And of course, people will say, let's go to court, litigation, this and that. Of course, there is a case in the International Court of Justice that has to do with two countries. So some people will say, let's go to court. But one thing about going to court is it does not actually take care of the emotions of the people before, during, and after those negotiations. Because what you get to understand in court that people try, everybody wants to be a winner. You're either a winner or a loser. But then we can also look at more approachable ways, like all those alternative dispute resolution mechanisms that can be used, like reconciliations. You can call for negotiations, you can call for mediations. You can even get a compromise. You get? So these are people that when there are conflicts, you can even envisage or seek the help of a higher authority. So as a bank president, I've been in situations where I have to make decisions and where people I work with, there are a lot of conflicting interests. And of course, when you start talking about the emotions of people, you see that emotions of people are already out of the way. So sometimes I have to envisage or seek the help of a higher authority. You can talk to the dean, you can talk to the staff advisors and something like that. But then even at that, when it gets maybe a national approach, you can resort to situations like arbitration, mediation, negotiations, and all sorts of that. So these are part of the ways you can manage, you can diffuse, you can de-escalate. Of course, de-escalate some of these conflicts.
Okay, that's quite that's okay. So Mr. Ago Daniel, when you were making your point, you talked about Israel and Palestine. What do you think Israel and Palestine would have done differently to avoid? Because right as it is now, a lot of people have been chased away from their homes. A lot of the kids involved, and then women and all that. So what do you think they ought to have done differently to avoid getting to this point?
All right. Thank you very much for that question. The problem is this crisis we're talking about happening, especially in the Middle East, citing Israel and Palestine as a case study, didn't start today. If you check through the history books, you will be able to identify or to get to know that I think around 1948 or 1967 there was a time Israel fought the 6-day war, and thereafter, and so there are many crises. It didn't start today. Yes, of course. That's the point I'm making. So if there had been a compromise from the very beginning, I believe that the problem should not have escalated up to the point, going from the words of my brother here. So it shouldn't have gone up to this point. But nonetheless, I still believe that there's room for peace talks. There's no better way than to have a roundtable discussion to iron out our issues and find a better way, to resolve the conflict so as not to further endanger the lives and properties of people.
Okay, that's quite impressive, Mr. Okeke-Chukwudikene and then Mr. Ago Daniel Chinonso. But Mr. Okeke-Chukwudikene, we want to know what is your parting remarks to the viewers, because there are people that are looking at us now that are watching this, and I'm sure they must have learned one or two things, and they must need some insightful words in addition to what you have said so far. So what is your parting remark to our viewers?
Okay, my parting remarks to the viewers is this: no matter how big the pandemonium can be, no matter how mighty the conflict can be, it is something that can be resolved by a little compromise. It's just like finding a middle ground. For example, I gave an example of a roommate saying that he wants to read with music loud, and the other roommate is saying, I don't want the music. Finding a middle ground can be getting an earpiece. or maybe going an extend and extra mile to say, okay, I want to leave this room for you since you don't, because it is about compromise and finding a middle ground. So I advise anybody that is in leadership, the hallmark of a good leader, it's how you manage conflicting interests amongst your members and amongst the persons that you are leading. So these are just part of the things I would.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Okekechukwu. So, Mr. Agodan Echinonso, so what can you add to what Mr. Okekechukwu have said?
Well, I think he has almost said it all, but just a word or two. What I believe is in resolving conflicts, I think there must be the genuineness to come to the common table, like I said, to have every party iron out their issues, and also there must also be room to actually have the compromise reached, put into practice.
So thank you, viewers. As you have seen, we've heard from our discussants, conflict is not the best way. Let compromise be your takeaway from this show. So we're going to meet next time on this platform, Leaders Hangout. Have a nice day.